Hello and welcome to LGA Voices here from Bournemouth. Today I'm lucky enough to be joined by Stuart Graham, the CEO of Millbank, a digital comms and content agency that specialises in support for local government. My name's Owen Pritchard. I'm the Digital Director of Data, Innovation and Insight at the LGA. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of communication and digital comms for local authorities. So, straight into it, how important is it that we use digital comms to manage resident expectations and meet those expectations in today's society?
I mean, it's so important. We've had, I think, many years now where local government hasn't quite kept up with central government and certainly with the private sector in terms of how it communicates. And I think we all know the importance of local democracy and engagement. So I think we're in a sort of defining period of local government. I think where residents are genuinely seem to be taking a bit more interest in what their local authorities are doing. After all, I mean, local authorities affect people's lives much more than I think we probably most of the public probably understand. As soon as someone walks out the door, they're affected by what their local authority does, more so than any layer of government, I would argue. And so I think the challenge for the sector is to really think about how you not just broadcast, but have a bit of a conversation with people and engage residents on the issues that matter to them. And I think digital, I'm biased, but digital I think is the only way to do that in a meaningful, scalable and fast way, really. And I think that's what we're trying to do, and particularly at this conference, sort of lay down the challenge to chief execs and officers of local authorities to start thinking about how, along with the digital transformation piece that a lot are doing, how you get that digital content output to match.
I think that's a important point, really, is taking the story to them. I think one of the things that we seem to be grappling with in local government and society as a whole is probably a increasing lack of cohesion and trust, right? And the reality is that how we tell the stories and how we communicate or engage, as you say, with our residents and with the people is an important part of meeting that trust. How do you think digital comms specifically helps build trust in that way?
I think trust is, I think it's the most important thing. I mean, we've seen over many years now. I mean, it's not a recent thing. The steady erosion of trust. I mean, in politics and our public sector as a whole. And I think local authorities sometimes unfairly get the brunt of that anger because they are just down the road. They're the most visible. As I say, they touch everybody's lives. So I mean, part of what we're trying to do, our sort of mantra is building trust digitally. That's what we exist to do, and to try through good content and storytelling over time, you build up trust so that when there is a challenging period, and of course, no authority goes through a period of perfection. There are flaws in every local authority that they've got to deal with and challenges that come along. I think it's important when those challenges do come along that you've already built up a good relationship with residents through storytelling and digital. You can, a local authority, and then manage that process a bit better. And they'll have an easier ride with residents after that. So I think the trust thing is so important for me. The story and how you communicate is very powerful to be able to do that. Humanizing the local authority. There's hundreds of people that work in most local authorities. A lot of the residents don't know what they do. They see this faceless organization, a big civic center. They don't know who works in there. They don't know how much people are paid, all of those things. And I think in that vacuum of not knowing and not being explained to, you allow other stories to take hold, and that's what I think most. I mean, certainly all the local authorities I've spoken to, that's the challenge they have, and particularly I think we might touch on this, but particularly as we get closer to LGR, I think councils are now starting to think about what their legacy is, and really how do they want to be remembered going into that LGR process.
The storytelling point is one that perhaps resonates with me most. As someone who has worked in technical areas for a while, I think for a large part of my career, I suffered from, or the people having to listen to me suffered from me resorting to technical detail and numbers and explaining the complicatedness and complexity of things through facts and figures, almost not wanting to get anything wrong. But I think as I've got older and, been sort of politics adjacent for a number of years, I've really learnt the importance and the gift of a good story and bringing it to life. Are there any sort of top tips that you'd give people on authentic storytelling, on how they bring incredibly complicated and complex issues to life?
Yeah, I think there is a tendency to, and I guess this is what we're trying to provide support to local authorities on. There's a tendency to overthink a story. So a lot of people will in internal comms teams think, well, we just need to turn up, do a video, and I think putting people in front of a camera doing a piece to camera, that's the story. And actually what we try to do is be a bit more muted in our approach. A story for us is going to see someone in their own setting where they are, filming them doing their day-to-day lives, asking them to talk from the heart about their experience with, often with the local authority and the services it provides. And I think for me it's the impact on the service user. What impact is the local authority and its services having on the person that is the member of the public, is the end user. That for me is a much more powerful way of telling the public what the council does. And it also, I think this big thing for me around the fact that residents are they're the people that are employed in the organisation are their neighbours too. That the fact that you could be sat in your house and you could have people either side of you that work in the local authority, quite conceivably, because they employ so many people. And I think it's telling that story that they are humans, they're delivering a really good service. I mean, councils do incredible work, but most of it goes unnoticed. It certainly goes unthanked, but it goes unnoticed. And this is not about achieving thanks for people, right? I'm sure most local authorities wouldn't want that. They get on with their job. The public sector does what it does for a reason. But this is solely about the trust thing, and just making the public know that actually they can trust in who's governing them.
I think you've hit on a few sort of important topics there, and I think, as I would expect from someone who works in comms, and especially sort of someone who's public sector adjacent, you've spoken about the importance of talking about the outcomes for a specific residents. But one of the other things you talked on was this, you mentioned with this idea of place. Now, I'm an avid watcher of TV drama, right? And one of the things that annoys me most when I watch it and stops me getting into that story is when it seems the place doesn't seem anonymous, or it's secondhand, or it's you can't feel it, right? And I think increasingly now with Manchesterism, with devolution, the idea of place and the importance of place is becoming more and more at the forefront of people's ideas, thinking both in concept and in storytelling. How important do you think place is, and how would you emphasize place in the storytelling that you do?
If you ask me to pick one single biggest, most important thing that runs through every strand of what we do, I think it would be place, without a doubt. We've worked with several local authorities now, and the big feeling that we try and tap into, particularly lately with our work with Harlow Council, for example, undergoing a huge regeneration project, one of the fastest growing areas in the UK, lots of money going in. And what the authority there has successfully managed to do is to really tap into the pride in the area. Went through a period of many years of not really knowing what its identity was. It was a new town, so it had an identity back in 1947 when it was created. As with a lot of new towns, it was sort of managed decline for a while. People thought, well, we can't really do much about this. We don't have the money. But I'm using this as a great example because the pride that exists now, I think, actually probably exceeds the pride that was there in 1947. People are behind it, and as a result, I mean, you can see the results from that. This is not just anecdotal. You look at the comments on social media. You look at the feeling. You look at the people. Our team are out in Harlow every day with the leader and other officers, and people do come up to even officers and say, look, your council's doing a really good job, and that storytelling that we've done around that pride, and it's sort of, this is the message is that to residents, this is our town as well. We the 800 or so people that work in Harlow, this is our place, and we care about it as much as you do, and that's why we're doing the hard work we're doing. So I think that's really important. It's like a collective ownership, isn't it?
I think that's a great example. So I know Dan Swords, the leader, and I know the delight he had. So for those who are unaware, Dan Swords is a Conservative politician, and he took great delight in the fact that there was a wonderful story about Harlow and the work that you and Dan and all the council had done there in the New Statesman. And for those who don't know, it's a left-leaning publication, and it shows that actually a good story, a sense of place, can go beyond those political boundaries, and people appreciate what they've done. I think that's kind of really important and reinforces this idea that you're doing. Now, to move on to something that's slightly more in my bailiwick, so to speak, which is data and insights. Now, I know one of the key things to communications this day and age is not just your gut instinct, but actually is where the data and the insights lead you. How important is that in the development of content and where you place that content in how you work and how council should work?
I think data is important to all of us in everyday life and every organisation, but I think it's just so much more important in local authorities where lots of local authorities have spent a lot of time carefully doing good work, but I think what a lot of them have been slow to take up is how they can use data to inform whether that work is landing or whether it's necessary, or whether even the public really prioritize certain projects. And I think what we've tried to do over the last few years is develop a sort of cyclical. We have a diagram that I'm quite proud of in one of our sort of information sheets, which is this sort of cyclical approach about how insights can feed into your output, but then it doesn't stop. It just carries on going. And I think that's really important. And in the internal comms teams that we work with, we challenge them day in, day out. We're relentless with it, really. I think they get a bit bored of us talking about data, but looking at the sentiment, looking at the data we get back, and we produce pretty exhaustive reports. Probably some of the most detailed reports. We give 30, 40-page reports every quarter to the authorities we work with, and essentially we're saying, look, chief execs, service directors, this is your Bible to go off and think about the demographics and the audiences that we're giving to you. I mean, that data is fantastic. And also, I think, I know it's a bit more anecdotal and less technical, but it's still data, is really looking at the comments on social platforms. I think this idea of public service, and I'm not talking about the sort of political angle here, because obviously we're not political, but from an officer perspective, I think senior officers should be looking at those comments all the time and looking at our reports that we give. We give a sort of daily well, not a daily digest, a weekly digest of the sort of key strands coming out, just so local authorities know what's being talked about on social media, because I think that is the medium by which people will voice disappointment, and if we don't use that to our advantage in the sector, then what's the point? I think that's and I think the work we're doing, I think if I can just sort of summarize it, is trying to bring the local authority sector, or the public sector generally, because we don't just work with local authorities, up to scratch and have parity with what the private sector has been doing for a long time. Um, and I think arguably where you've got democracy, taxpayer money, all of that stuff, transparency, all of that important stuff at stake, I think it's so important for local authorities to really know what they're dealing with.
Well, as someone who loves diagrams, I'm delighted that you've talked about this cycle. And as someone who's ex-army, it reminds me greatly of what was called the OODA loop back in the day, the observe, orientate, decide and act, and the constant cycle there. So it resonates with me. I also think what you're talking about is really kind of interesting in that kind of sentiment analysis space, and what you're trying to pull from what people are saying back to you in this digital comms. Now, with all of that in mind, you've covered a lot of things. What's the final top tip that you'd give to a director or chief executive or council leader of a council in terms of their digital comms?
Top tips, I think there are so many I could give, but if you've asked me to pick one, so I'll be disciplined. Um, the At the moment, I think we've got 2 years to massive change in the sector, biggest since 1974. Now seems like the moment to really take up change and transformation, and not just, I'm not talking about transformation as just these sort of words that we use and they get put in a document and the document gets sat on the shelf and not doesn't flow through the organization. I'm talking about real transformation. So I think my tip would be bold. This is the time to do things differently. You don't need to talk like a councillor has always spoken. There's nothing wrong with changing your tone and changing the content, changing the way that you talk to residents. Just like there's nothing wrong with being bold with digital transformation. Councils should have apps. We should be making it easier for residents to engage with the local authority. These things do also, more importantly, and this is had this conversation with chief execs yesterday probably about 10 times, is you don't need to spend more money doing this. If anything, it can save money. You just need to do it better and start doing it differently. And I think that is our challenge to local authorities: is be bold, be transformational, and it will only benefit the residents in the long run.
Well, I think be bold is a great way to finish. So thank you for joining me here in sunny Bournemouth today at LGA Voices. I really appreciate everyone listening, and take care for now.